Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by BASF.
Sean Haney here with Real Agriculture. It's time for another episode of the Pulse School. Today we're talking about a really important topic, Group 11 resistance when it comes to fungicides. We talk a lot about resistance when it comes to herbicides, but fungicide resistance is also a thing. And today, to discuss this topic, it is Bethany Wyatt. She is Senior Technical Services Specialist with BASF. Hey, Bethany, it is great to chat with you.
Thank you. Very nice to be here and chat with you as well, Sean.
Yeah, so let's dig in. I guess give us the lay of the land. How significant is Group 11 resistance on the prairies?
So when it comes to Group 11 resistance and pulses on the prairies, I think it's definitely a lot bigger issue than it's first realized. I think a lot of people have gained awareness over the last number of years, just with us or BSF discovering the first cases of Group 11 resistant anthracnose and lentils. Since then, we've continued to sample, and we can confidently say that that is across the lentil growing region. But Group 11 resistance in pulses is not new, kind of dating back to the early mid 2000s, starting with Group 11 resistant ascochyta in chickpeas, which today it's quite well known that if you have ascochyta in chickpeas, it's going to be Group 11 resistant. And then also mycosphaerella in peas. That was first confirmed as resistant, or first cases as resistant, by Bruce Gosson back in 2008. I would say it's not as prevalent as ascochyta and anthracnose, but it definitely is there. I think also just the last number of years being so dry, there just hasn't been a lot of disease in general. But I think once we get a little bit of a wetter year and heavier disease pressure, it's definitely going to be more evident. But it's there, and it's been there, and will continue to be.
Unfortunately so. Okay, so let's talk about some of the warning signs or symptoms that might indicate that you have Group 11 resistance on your farm.
Yeah, so I think we can draw some similarities to herbicide resistance, which we can when it comes to fungicide resistance in general. But as with herbicide resistance, we know we kind of first realize that we might have a bit of an issue or have a hunch if you have uncontrolled weeds. You kind of have those patches of weeds where you notice there is some uncontrolled. When it comes to fungicide resistance, it's similar. I mean, realistically, it's going to come down to, you're probably going to notice that fungicides that may have been effective in the past just aren't working as good as they used to. Fungicides can be a little bit tougher though, because the diseases are quite patchy in nature. So they're kind of just patchy in the field. Conditions can vary. I mean, if you get continued moisture, humidity, and the fact that they're polycyclic diseases, these early season diseases, the ones that we are worried about resistance, they can have multiple cycles per year. So it's not as black and white, I guess, as with herbicide resistance. But usually the first indicator is just, again, you're going to notice that you may not be getting quite the level of control that you have come to know with some fungicides that you've used in the past.
Do we have some math or a handle on the impact here when it comes to crop yield and quality, or is that also a little bit more elusive, so to speak?
So that's one of the things that even at BSF, I mean, we're still, ever since the discovery of especially Group 11 resistant anthracnose and lentils, really starting to get more of a handle on and try and get a bit better of a number. I think it's, again, pretty tough to say, just the nature of diseases, that they can be polycyclic. A fungicide is only going to last 10 to 14 days depending on conditions, and sometimes even less. And then again, it's going to just depend on the pressure, and again, how many disease cycles per year you get of these diseases. Again, hard not to mention, the last few years being quite dry, so we're just not having that disease pressure. But realistically, we know that a lot of these early season pulse diseases that we do see Group 11 resistance in can be quite devastating and lead to very high yield losses, up to 50%, anthracnose with lentils. So if you have group 11 resistance in a almost completely or near completely resistant population, and if you have high disease pressure, it's not being controlled, then it definitely could be reaching as high as that.
Yeah, and the struggle in pulse crops is like you think about chickpeas and ascochyta, multiple spraying inside of one season, right? So this sort of the same issue that it'll be even more so when you look at horticulture, for sure. But if you look at broadacre crops, pulses is one where we have multiple applications of fungicide. Now, strategies. Now we were comparing to the herbicide resistance earlier. We talk there a lot about herbicide layering. We talk about multiple modes of action. With fungicides, what do we do? What are the successful strategies that we should be paying attention to?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and definitely can draw some similarities from herbicide resistance and dealing with that. So I think the absolute biggest one when it comes to dealing with fungicide resistance is kind of same with herbicide resistance, just general good agronomy, crop rotation. Obviously, the difference between diseases and fungicide resistance is that you need that crop as the host in order for that selection pressure to be there. Whereas weeds, they're kind of going to be there every year. So the selection pressure is likely going to be increased.
Hmm.
If you have a good rotation, 1 in 3 or even 1 in 4 years, understand economics have to come into play. But if you have that wider or that longer crop rotation, that alone is going to help break down that inoculum. These species or pathogens can only survive for so many years. So crop rotation is definitely going to be the biggest start because that alone is going to decrease your selection pressure. Then, when it comes to a year that you have that crop, applying a fungicide, making sure that you are not applying multiple applications of the same group. So, same thing, rotating, including multiple modes of action, not relying on just a single mode of action, making sure that you are applying a product that at least has two or more modes of action. Understanding in fungicides, we are a lot more limited. We really only have the group 3, 7s, and 11 as kind of our main ones. So also just being responsible with that, understanding what groups are in your products, not cutting rates, applying them preventatively to make sure that we are getting good control, and following up with additional applications if the environmental conditions do persist.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. There has been some moments through the years where there's been, hey, even though it's kind of a drier year, you hear some of the benefits of still using a fungicide. With the advent of more group 11 resistance on fungicides, should we reconsider some of those prior recommendations when it comes to maybe in those drier years, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, another really good question, I would say. Group 11s, obviously, we've been very, very reliant on them, especially in pulses, kind of since the introduction of them in the early 2000s. And they've worked well, and they worked very well for a long time, kind of until they haven't. So I would say Group 11 still can have a place in pulse production. I mean, especially if you're doing multiple applications, you're probably not going to get completely away of an application without a Group 11. So again, it's just keeping in mind only doing if you're going to include a Group 11, making sure that you get that on early. The way that group 11s work is they essentially inhibit spore germination. So in that very early part of the disease cycle. So making sure that if you are using them, you're applying them preventatively to make sure that you are targeting the right part of the disease cycle. And then there are potentials though for making sure that if you are going to get away from them, there are other options now. And I mean, we do have a new product, ReviPro. It's the first non-group 11 containing pulse fungicides. So there are options. But if you are going to, again, just making sure you get them on early and don't apply a single app of a group 11. Make sure that you have another mode of action in with that, and then not applying multiple applications of it, of a group 11 per season.
Don't cut rates either, right? Does that apply in this case as well?
Definitely. Yes. Thank you. Definitely meant to add that one. I'd say that's kind of like with herbicides. That's where we were sometimes seeing, resistance developing. You're kind of just giving those little lower rates, sublethal rates where it's not quite controlling it. It's kind of the same with disease pathogens. If you're cutting rates, you're not going to be providing that control, and any insensitive individuals can continue to live on, and of course shift that population in the field to a more resistant population quicker.
Bethany, to wrap up here, is there some forecasting or some future looking here? Where does this take us? Do we expect that the Group 11 resistance to be much more prolific across the prairies, or are we kind of at the top end of the worst point?
I think when it comes to chickpeas and realistically lentils, or ascochyta with chickpeas and anthracnose with lentils, from what we've seen, resistance is there, and it's across the growing region.
It's
Kind of,
everywhere.
to date, BASF has sampled 114 lentil fields for Group 11 resistant anthracnose. 13 of them come back with some level of resistance, so 99%. So it's kind of wherever we test, we find. Not saying it's a very high population in all those fields, but there is at least some there.
Yeah.
So definitely something to keep in mind. I don't think we're at a total doom and gloom. We still definitely have a chance. But when it comes to mycosphaerella and peas, I'd say that's probably one on the lower end. But we still have a chance there. Definitely continue to be responsible and mix up the groups and utilize groups. Rotate your crops as much as possible. We still are not at a be all end all situation where we are with maybe some of the herbicide resistant weeds.
Well, Bethany, really appreciate you joining us on this episode of the Pulse School. Very, very important topic, and appreciate you shedding some light on it.
Perfect. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate the time.
If you want to see more great Pulse content, go to pulseschool.com.